All right, breaking. Now, Trump's team is rushing as Ivanka's case grows bigger. Template training breakdown. The biggest red flag isn't even the main accusation. It's that the timeline doesn't match. And when timelines don't match in a court case, it usually means one of two things. Either someone is showing the order wrong, or someone is hiding a step that connects the dots. And today, Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, that missing step is exactly what this new packet is trying to force into the open. Here's what happens step by step. Because the public story you're seeing online is clean and emotional, but the court record story is messy and technical. And messy plus technical is where panic lives. At 7:06 a.m. Eastern, a new entry appears on the fictional docket of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Manhattan, titled as a Notice of Extra Submission and Updated Timeline. And in plain English, that means someone just told the court. The story you think is happening is not the story the record shows. And when that happens, defense teams don't just give statements. They start making calls because timeline is the skeleton of every legal strategy. If the bones are wrong, everything falls apart. At 7:14 a.m., a second entry posts a motion for clarification of preservation representations and limited in-camera review, which is a fancy way of saying, Judge, we believe the defense told you something about saving records, special rights, or control of materials. And we want you to privately review a small set to check whether that statement is true. And if you've ever watched these cases, you know that the moment the word preservation shows up next to the word clarification, the temperature changes because preservation is where courts stop being patient. And then at 7:22 a.m., a third entry appears, an exhibit listed through heavy redactions, but the index alone is enough to tell you what kind of storm is forming because it's not one document, it's a packet. And packets are not filed for casual disputes. Packets are filed when someone wants the court to see a pattern. Now, before we go any further, quick context in the competitor style so nobody is lost. In this fictional scenario, Ivanka Trump is the defendant in a high-profile matter that blends business activity, compliance duties, and claimed misstatements in a way that creates two competing stories. And Trump's political operations call it, his team is trying to keep the public conversation framed as persecution and family loyalty, while the legal operation is trying to keep the court conversation framed as narrow and procedural. Because the more narrow and procedural it stays, the less it turns into an emergency situation where judges start tightening conditions. But today, the reason everyone is rushing is that the filing claims the defense's own timeline is inconsistent with third-party records. And if that's true, it doesn't just look bad. It triggers core instincts about reliability. And here's the hook. Because this is the part that makes the template work. The chaos is not just that the case is exploding. It's that the explosion appears to be self-caused by sequence errors, public statements, private communications, and procedural representations that can't all be true at the same time. The story the public has been told in this fictional version is simple. There was a routine compliance request. The defense responded, the matter escalated because of politics and the families being targeted. But the story the new filing claims, again fictional, is more complicated. It suggests there was an internal awareness window, days, not months, where decisions were made to route communications differently, to reclassify certain materials, and to delay disclosures in a way that only makes sense if someone expected scrutiny. And that's why the timeline doesn't match. Because if you claim you learned about an issue on day X, but travel records, meeting logs, or service provider notices show activity on day X-5, the court doesn't need a conspiracy theory. It needs an explanation. And that brings us to the 72-hour escalation beat that competitors' scripts use to lock retention. Saturday, February 7th, a sealed clerk's notice is entered referencing expected extra timeline. Sunday, February 8th, a short letter is filed asking for a conference no later than Tuesday. Monday, February 9th, late night, a stipulation appears showing the parties talked but remain at an impasse. Tuesday morning, February 10th, the judge grants an expedited status conference for 2045 p.m. The same day, 4 steps, 3 days, 1 outcome. The judge is now directly involved. And when judges are directly involved, PR stops driving. Now, what makes this case explode in story terms is that the new packet allegedly introduces a contradiction that splits the family strategy in two. The political side wants immediate aggression, full defense, attack the system, rally supporters, while the legal side wants precision and silence until they can fix the record. Because if the filing is right and the timeline is off, the worst possible move is to make confident claims that later become inconsistent with sworn statements. And you can actually feel that split in the way the fictional responses roll out. A draft statement gets floated. We have always complied and will continue to comply. Then it gets softened to we take compliance seriously. Then it gets delayed. Then it gets posted as something like, "We will address this in court," which is the universal sign that the lawyers won the internal argument. Now let's walk through the packet using the competitor's document blocks technique. Because even though we're not quoting real pages here, the structure is the point your training format. Document 1 in the fictional packet is a supplemental timeline table, and what it does is line up events in 3 columns: defense statement, third-party record, and difference. And the brilliance from a story standpoint is that a table does the accusing without sounding emotional, because the filing doesn't need to say they lied. It just needs to say these dates don't match, and the court will do the rest. In this fictional table, the differences cluster around 4 categories: communication channel changes, device control, meeting order, and travel timing. Communication shift means messages allegedly move from official email to encrypted or informal channels right around the time compliance notices were served. Device control means a device that was said to be in secure storage appears in a third-party log to have been active during that storage window. Meeting order means a meeting that was described as after the fact appears to have happened before the fact, which matters because before implies intent. Travel timing means someone was in a place they claimed they were not in at the relevant moment, which turns a misunderstanding into a question. Document 2 is a declaration of records authentication filed by a custodian type, someone who can say, "I pull these logs from the provider in a way that makes the judge comfortable relying on it." And if you've ever seen how these fights go, you know why this is devastating. Lawyers can argue about meaning all day, but when a record custodian declares a timestamp trail, the fight narrows. Document 3 is the motion itself. The motion asks the judge to order a limited in-camera review of a small set. Think half a dozen items so the judge can decide whether special rights are being claimed properly or as a shield for timeline problems. Because here's the thing about special rights in these stories. Special rights are supposed to protect legal consultation, not to rewrite time. If the court suspects special rights are being used to avoid explaining the order, the court gets skeptical fast. And now, what's the panic inside the family piece? The human layer that makes this format perform. In this fictional story, the packet arrives and instantly forces internal questions nobody wants to answer out loud. Who knew what? When did they know it? Who approved routing changes? Who advised silence? Who drafted the timeline the defense has been using, and who signed off on the statements that are now being challenged? And if you're thinking, why would that cause panic? Because panic doesn't mean people are guilty. Panic means the cost of being wrong just went up. It means a judge might order sworn certifications. It means inconsistent statements could become punishable. It means third parties might be subpoenaed. And most of all, it means internal unity breaks when different people have different risk. Now, the competitor template always inserts a what nobody's covering beat. So here it is. The filing in this fictional version isn't just about the defendant. It is about the surrounding operation because it suggests that to understand the difference, the court may need to look at how information flowed through the team, which is where political organizations hate to go because political organizations run on controlled messaging. And controlled messaging hates discovery. The exhibit index in this fictional packet includes items like calendar extract, travel summary, service provider preservation notice, device chain of custody form, encrypted application metadata, and draft statement versions. And that last one is the quiet killer draft statement. Versions matter because they show what people believed at the time they were writing, what they were trying to say, what they were told to remove, and who told them. And in cases where timeline is at issue, drafts can become the most honest record of what was known when. Now, you might ask, okay, but why would Trump's team rush specifically? Why not just let the lawyers handle it? Because in this fictional scenario, the political calendar is colliding with the legal calendar, and collision always produces rushing. There is a scheduled media appearance window that can't be missed without looking weak. There are donor events that depend on the family strength story, and there is internal pressure from loyal supporters who treat silence as betrayal. But the new filing makes a strong defense risky because it attacks the credibility of the timeline itself. And you cannot loudly defend a timeline while a judge is literally scheduling the conference to ask why the timeline doesn't match third-party records. That's the trap. Now, competitor scripts do a both sides block to appear fair. So, let's do that in the same tone. To be fair, timeline disputes happen. Timestamps can be misread. Logs can reflect background processes. Travel records can be incomplete. And high-profile targets can be pursued aggressively. And it is not crazy in a political climate to suspect that enforcement intensity is uneven. But here's the counter view. And this is where the script pivots back to gravity. Courts don't speed up conferences because of politics. They speed up when they believe the process is at risk, when compliance, preservation, or honesty is threatened. So even if you think the underlying case is motivated, the procedural response becomes real once the judge is engaged. And now we move to the conference because that's the centerpiece. At 2:45 p.m. Eastern, Feb 10, 2026, in this fictional court, Judge Elena Marquez holds the expedited status conference. It's not a trial. It's not a spectacle. It's procedural. But procedural is where outcomes form. The judge opens with something like, I have reviewed the extra timeline and I want to understand the difference categories. And then she does what judges do. She narrows. She asks the defense whether they can certify preservation. She asks who prepared the original timeline. She asks whether any devices changed control after notices were served. And she asks whether special rights are being claimed over metadata, which is a critical detail because special rights usually don't cover metadata like timestamps and routing. Defense counsel tries to frame it as misunderstanding. Your Honor, these are technical lobs open to interpretation and the moving party response. That's why we're asking for a limited in-camera review. And the judge, seeing that both sides are posturing, makes the practical move. She orders a short list, not everything, just enough to test reliability. She orders a sworn certification by end of week. She schedules a follow-up. And she warns that if the timeline misrepresentation is serious, the court will consider remedies. And remedies is the word that makes teams rush because remedies can mean penalties, negative assumptions, tightened conditions, or expanded discovery. Now, competitor scripts add an indicator beat a small detail that signals bigger trouble. So here's the fictional indicator. A third-party service provider notice included in the packet is dated earlier than the defense claimed they became aware of preservation duties. In simple English, it suggests they were told to preserve before they said they were told. And that's why the timeline doesn't match, because if you were told earlier, then your later actions are seen through a different lens. And that lens is intent. Now we go to the expert chorus because it reinforces and gives the viewer mental anchors. Former federal prosecutor voice. When a court focuses on chronology, it's often because the underlying dispute has become less important than the credibility dispute. White-collar defense attorney voice. The quickest way to turn a manageable case into an unmanageable case is to give the court a reason to doubt your statements. Data forensics expert voice. Metadata is stubborn. People can delete messages, but they struggle to delete the footprint of when and how systems were accessed. Constitutional law professor voice. Public messaging can backfire if it creates inconsistencies with pending certifications. And then, the kicker in these montages, even sympathetic analysts often say the same thing. Stop posting. Start reconciling because the record is undefeated. Now we widen stakes because the competitor template always builds upward. This isn't just one defendant. It's a test of whether powerful families can control the story faster than courts can control the process. It's a lesson in how quickly public loyalty demands can collide with legal caution. It's also a preview of the next era of political legal content, where campaigns try to spin while court records try to enforce order. And for regular people watching, the relevant point isn't celebrity, it's precedent. When courts start tightening preservation and compliance expectations in high-profile cases, it becomes easier for prosecutors and judges to demand the same in lower-profile ones. The baseline shifts. You'll see more aggressive preservation orders, more third-party subpoenas, more early conferences because the system learns from the cases that embarrass it. Now, we bring it back down to the family because the human drama is the fuel. In this fictional story, the family operation splits into camps overnight. A war camp, a silence camp, and a compromise camp. The war camp wants to attack the judge, accuse bias, flood the zone. The silence camp wants no statements until certifications are filed. The compromise camp wants a controlled message. We respect the process and will prevail. And the reason the team rushes is that those camps require different behavior, and different behavior can't happen at the same time without contradiction. If you attack the court at 3 p.m. and request the court's discretion at 3:05 p.m., you look unserious. If you claim total compliance and then file a clarification acknowledging gaps, you look slippery. So the rush is the attempt to align behavior with the procedural position the new filing just forced. And then we hit the late script retention hook. What happens next? Because this format always ends with a countdown. Here are the fictional dates to watch. Wednesday, February 11th, preservation certification drafts circulated internally. Thursday, February 12th, the moving party files a response disputing any innocent explanation for the difference categories. Friday, February 13th, deadline for sworn preservation certification and special rights index submission. Tuesday, February 17th, follow-up status conference where the judge decides whether to expand in-camera review into broader production. And if the judge sees continued mismatch, that's when conditions tighten and the case truly explodes beyond a manageable perimeter. And now we close the competitor way with a clean summary of where we are right now because viewers love a recap. As of Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, Trump's team is rushing, not because the headlines are loud, but because the record is getting specific. The new filing claims the defense timeline conflicts with third-party records. The judge has scheduled and held an expedited conference. Limited in-camera review has been ordered. Preservation certifications are now on the clock, and from here forward, every public statement becomes riskier because it can be measured against sworn timelines. That's why the timeline doesn't match matters. It's the difference between a messy story and a controlled one. It's the difference between a story fight and a credibility fight. And credibility fights are the fights you can't spin your way out of. So if you want the next update in the same filings first format, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next packet, whether it's a certification, a rebuttal, or an expanded exhibit set, will tell you whether this stabilizes into routine procedure or speeds up into something that changes the position entirely. And I'll break it down. The only way this genre works, by sequence, by pattern, and by what the record forces people to admit, not by what anyone wants the audience to. All courtrooms information soldier command.